good? Good evening, everybody. Hi. Good evening. We'd like to get started. Thank you all for coming in. I just wanted to welcome you all to the fourth annual Lucas Daniel Lecture Series. And my name is Anijo Matthew. I am the interim dean of the Institute of Design here at Illinois Tech. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Institute of Design, we are an 85-year-old design school, and we are the pioneers of human-centered design. So this is, in one way, the birthplace of human-centered design, which eventually went on to become design thinking. And one of the reasons why we are well known around the world is because we approach design from a systems lens. So a lot of the work that we do here in the school is from that point of view. It's about big problems, it's about systemic issues, it's about things that impact multiple generations of people. And that's really what we are interested in. We're not interested in design that impacts one generation or two generations. We're interested in design that impacts multiple generations. And that's what ID is known for. And so with that lens, we work across multiple topical spaces, cities, education, finance, food systems, healthcare, all of the things that we hold so valuable to our generational change. So welcome to the Institute of Design, and I'm really excited that you're here. We are here to be part of the Lucas Daniel Lecture Series. The Lucas Daniel Lecture Series was set up to honor an ID alum, Lucas Daniel, who went to school here, and we lost him in 2017. Lucas was very interested in sustainability and system-based design, and so the lecture series honors his memory by bringing in speakers who can talk to that level of, engage in that level of conversation. Talk about sustainability, talk about system-level changes, and the way we do that is by having them give a lecture and then partake in conversation with our students, faculty, and our community members. And so that's the experience that you're going to have today here at ID. And so before we get started, I want to introduce a very special guest for our evening today. It's our president, Raj Achambadi. He's honored us by joining us today. And Raj is very new to the Illinois Institute of Technology. He actually joined us last August. Before joining us here at IIT, or Illinois Tech, he was the dean at Northeastern's Graduate School of Business, and School of Business at Northeastern University. And before that, he was at UIUC, where Raj actually established the very well-known business program, the online business program called IMBA. And what Raj is doing here at the university is very similar work, where he's accelerating IIT or Illinois Tech into the next decade with that kind of thinking. So with that, I want to introduce Raj. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Anijo. Thank you. Good evening to all of you. I want more energy. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Anijo, for that very kind introduction. And the honor is all mine to be here to welcome you all for the fourth annual Lucas J. Daniel Lecture. At the outset, I will say I'm very deeply grateful to Lucas's mother, Marty, and his wife, April, and their friends for endowing this lecture and for enabling us to get incredible, eminent speakers who can actually talk about sustainable systems. And I want to thank Erika Allen. Thank you. In my briefing document, I saw your bio, I saw your CV, and I also saw the work that you're doing, very inspiring. And I know that you were connected with iPro in the past, and I hope we have sustained, continued engagement with you. And because as I was coming to this event, it brought me back 25 years ago. I started my career, I was a mechanical engineer by profession. I started my career as a tractor engineer, service engineer for Massey Tractors in India. And part of my job was to spend about 6 months in the product training center for Massey, where I learned how to plow with tractors. And the other 6 months, I learned how to service a tractor, etc. So 25 years ago, Erika, if you can believe it or not, I could assemble and disassemble a tractor with these bare hands. But of course, thank you. But now I can't hang a picture on the wall, so that tells you. But you know, coming from an agrarian economy and seeing agriculture firsthand as a service engineer for Massey, I gained a lot of appreciation that I would not have otherwise growing up in an urban city and so on. And as things would have it, obviously I spent a lot of time at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, also affectionately known as the Silicon Valley. It's a corny joke, but you have to, you know. But coming back to Illinois Tech, in the last 8.5 months that I've been here, we have been talking about a few things. But the recurrent themes for us happen to be 3 things, which will be interesting to you, Erika. One is we need to be purpose-driven citizens in all our communities. And I'm very glad to note that Alicia Bunton, who's a Presidential Fellow on Communities here, Alicia has been doing phenomenal work. Alicia, don't be shy, stand up and say, you know. So has been doing some phenomenal work in terms of community and so on. The second is we want to reimagine education in terms of what we offer, and we are looking at it mainly from a transdisciplinary perspective. And when I look at your work doesn't fall in silos. It is holistic, it is cohesive, which is what we want to do. And interestingly, one of the areas that we are very interested in when you think about the excellence bets that we want to make into the future, it is fundamentally with respect to food. As you know, we have a world-famous center, IFISH, Institute of Food Security and Health, which was actually fundamentally, it's a collaboration with FDA that examines various issues in health, and that's going to be our excellence bet, if you will. And last but not the least, connecting the notion of food with community. We think this is, you know, obviously from a pragmatic perspective, this is going to help our students, this is going to help our faculty and staff. But at a very macro level, we think this is going to enable us to become an opportunity engine. For 131 years, we have done extraordinarily well of being the opportunity engine. We are the number one in the state of Illinois in moving people from the bottom 20th percentile of household income to the top 20th percentile. Thank you, that deserves an applause. 1/3 of our students are Pell eligible students. And in the last 40 years, when you think about the ROI, and this is a Georgetown study, we are actually number one in the state of Illinois in sustained ROI over a 40-year period. So that tells you what we have done and how we have enabled social and economic mobility. And to me, that is what is most inspiring about your work, Erika. It is not just looking at food or sustainability or energy in a siloed way, but looking at it holistically so that you can actually foster social cohesion and engender economic mobility. So thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you to all of you, our wonderful faculty, staff, and students for making this wonderful day possible. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So you can all see why we are excited about the lecture today, because the university is putting in a considerable amount of investment in food systems. And for those of you who have been associated with the Institute of Design, you will know that we have put in a considerable amount of investment into food systems also. And one of the star people that is making that happen is, of course, our associate professor, Veslin Ashton. Veslin is a joint appointment between Stewart and ID, and her interests are in sustainable systems, and especially where sustainability intersects with equity and community development. And this is an important thing for ID. And Veslin is one of our star faculty, and she is going to lead the proceedings from now on. So for everybody, please give a round of applause to Veslin Ashton.
Thanks, Anijo. Good evening, everyone. All right, you got the message. So thank you all for joining us here this evening for the Lucas J. Daniel Lecture in Sustainable Systems. I am very honored that Erika Allen has decided to join us this evening. When you hear about food in Chicago, Erika Allen is a name that's really synonymous with the transformative changes that have been happening over the 2 decades. Erika has founded numerous farms, integrating racial equity into her work, training young people, bringing more and more people into the food system, and a food system that really serves all. She is currently the CEO, co-founder, operations director for the Urban Growers Collective, and the president of Green Era Educational, not-for-profit, and the co-owner of Green Era Sustainability Partners. I've known Erika, I don't know precisely how long, but it's a few years. We'll call it 10 years. And I know her mainly through her work with the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, and more recently with the Community Food Navigator. So these are policy and data-driven initiatives that are aiming to drive equity and sustainability in the food system. So the title of Erika's talk this evening is Climate Resilience, Intersections, Food, Environment, and Culture at the Crossroads of Economic Justice. So Erika will speak, and then we will have a Q&A. I'll be joined by Justin Walker, one of our recent ID alums, in conversation with Erika, and then we'll open it up and have a reception at 7 p.m. All right, so Erika, I turn it over to you. And this hair.
Water. Okay, I think I can just advance this, right?
Yes, you should be.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. Hello. I'm excited to share some thoughts and accomplishments, but really to kind of activate this conversation tonight. I'm lucky for all of us. I'm just coming back from a sojourn into the Low Country, which is where my father's side of my family is from. And whenever I go home, I really think about the roots, like why do we do the things we do? Why are we attracted to growing food in the city? Why is that important? And I just, from Charleston to Tybee Island, just kept seeing and getting affirmations around how important it is to know who you are, know who your culture is, and to be able to continue to make that connection to the earth. So that's a big part of why I do the work that I do, why I think a lot of the people within our collective and who I've worked with over the last 20 years do this work. It's really about reclamation and utilizing the food system to really drive home these ideas of freedom and sovereignty. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about just from Urban Growers Collective's perspective and some of the images that we use and why we do the work we do, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my art and then go into the future. So you can see our logo here, and there's a bunch of stuff written there that please read. I won't read it to you. But we decided when we closed the Growing Power Chicago office to utilize this image, this idea of pathways to freedom, because really the food system allows us to really address all modalities, which is why it was so exciting for me to work in that as an interdisciplinary artist and then an art psychotherapist, I just saw it as such a way to connect people with their culture, with the earth, with a means for just nourishment and sustenance, but also a way to begin to deconstruct systems of oppression. You can ask really interesting questions when you start talking about growing food in cities or anywhere. Like, why can't I grow food here? Who owns this land? Why can't I own this land? Like, who makes these decisions? It really opens up lots of inquiry. And it's really a way to begin to look at cities and spaces, whether in kind of crowded places like a city like Chicago, that also have really spacious, empty spaces, and to ask those questions around why do we have these kinds of paradigms. So the drinking gourd was sort of our kind of icon to think through that and just the long legacy of liberation and freedom and how that symbolism was used, to, North Star to guide people to freedom. So it's a very powerful and connected to our ancestors' iconography. We also grow a lot of gourds. They're beautiful, they're utilitarian. You can make everything out of them. Traditionally, they're used for everything from bathing children to serving food, for implements, for cooking, for eating. You actually can eat them too. So just the idea, and I think everywhere across the world, people use gourds traditionally. So being able to take something that is really rooted to indigenous culture globally, so whether it's indigenous to the Americas or to Asia or to Africa, any of the continents, and to reconnect people to who they are, really as part of deconstructing oppression. Because oppression wants us all to be the same, right? Just to neutralize, to smooth everything over. And that's when we really lose our connection to the earth and who we are. So, that's why we use this image. And I included an homage to Harriet Tubman, who is a conductor, and it's some of the language that we're re-embracing around some of the pathways to freedom work that we're doing now with Urban Growers Collective. I'll talk a little bit later about our herbalism program, but we kind of co-created that in a circular fashion with our collective, and the leader of that program, Kim Crutcher, she decided to call herself not the instructor, not the facilitator, but the lead conductor. And I just love that, like that organically manifested, because she really, thought of how people, when they begin reconnecting to the earth and plants, really it's another pathway to liberation. So this idea of pathways around conducting, multidisciplinary approaches, re-embracing indigenous heritage through the earth, and how that leads us into new kind of paradigms and problem solving. I also like using words, since I'm in a design school here. I like the like sort of these defining, restoration, reclamation, reparations, repair. So these are kind of words that kind of keep sort of recurring, recirculating. So I could go on and just do a whole patois of all of these words. But that idea of redefining what those pathways mean. So I wanted to open up by sharing that and these icons, because they're important and they're kind of little clues as to how we are achieving this. So this is one of my favorite little symbols. It's not little, because I tend to minimize when it's something very large, or vice versa. Sankofa. So a lot of times you'll see Sankofa as a bird reaching back, but this is another kind of lesser known image of Sankofa. It's from the Akan people in Ghana, but it's the idea of going backwards to learn from the past to go forward. So this idea of perpetual motion of forward, backward, to be in the present. And I love it because it's heart-centered and really speaks of sort of that energy that is, I don't know, it just makes sense to me when I look at the image. I understand the iconography in a way that words, I can put a bunch of words, a bunch of re's on it, that this really explains so much. So I wanted to share that. It's also one of the images that these adinkras that our partner, and I'll share a little bit later, in Auburn Gresham uses as kind of wayfinding throughout the community of Auburn Gresham, adinkra symbols, because they really speak, they embody so much. I just mentioned I was in the Low Country. Looky here. Here's some more iconography. That's Sankofa. So Philip Simons is a iron craftsman, and you can see his work all over Charleston. And it's so powerful to be in a city like Charleston that has just so much beautiful brickwork, ironwork, the layout, the cobblestones, and to sort of be, I'm always kind of torn when I see when I'm in these kinds of cities, these southern enslaving kind of port cities, because I see the beauty and it's, I'm impressed, right? I have all that kind of romance, and then I kind of have this jolt of, but my people were enslaved through these systems, but look at what we did. You know, and so this is one of these kind of images that is bittersweet, but also just speaks to the craftsmanship, even under duress, even under trauma, what people of color have been able to do within this country and globally. And I really wanted to begin this conversation with these images of Sankofa, which you can see, knowing that even within that, the culture was still continuing and being revealed within the work. Nobody knew that these were Sankofa, right? But he was able to embody those images and keep them there for you know, years later for someone like me to come through and identify and see that and resonate and have a visceral experience. So this is one of my pieces, and this is also called Sankofa, and this is, again, it's about facing yourself, facing the past to go forward. And a lot of the images that I do, and I think some of the land-based, fifth-dimensional work that we've been doing, or earth-based work, is very much, and I use we a lot because it really is we. I'm not being like all extra. It's like so many people. I conduct. I'm embracing the conductor language now too. I have the ability to project images onto land and then make them happen, and which I didn't understand was something that that everyone couldn't do that. So which has taken me years to understand that and to better translate what I'm seeing so people understand my vision and then can help to manifest it. Because I think that is part of the wonderful way that we work, is that we're not just talking about these issues, right? Not just designing around these issues or writing about these issues, but literally on the ground implementing the manifestation of what we want to see to be able to transform the socioeconomic landscape of our communities. So this is what we do. So we really use the food system as a tool to dismantle structural racism. And I'm real particular about the language, again, with my re's, right? That I'm not trying to dismantle racism, or we aren't trying to dismantle racism using the food system. I mean, in the food system, like, let's fix the food system, there's no racism. But the food becomes a tool to dismantle systems of oppression. And there's a subtlety there that's really important to understand, because we can talk about the issues. We can have a nice banner of all the things that we're gonna, these are our tenets, this is what we're gonna do, but then still continue operating from a framework of white supremacy. So I think it's really important to distinguish and understand and constantly re-examine how and what we mean by those words. And it's not easy, because it's it's much more comfortable to fall into systems of oppression. There's lots of rewards there. It's very difficult to hold up these conversations and to hold institutions, ourselves, folks with power, with resources, at the community level, some of those same dynamics operating in similar destructive ways, to be able to kind of forge through and create new pathways where people can relate and build a healthy community in a different way. So that's part of our mission, to do that. And none of these things are in a monolith. They're all, you know, they're all circular and integrated. Sometimes there's, you know, we just went through the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic. We shifted into emergency food. I hadn't done emergency food for years, but I've done it before. So it's kind of going through the, I'm gonna date myself, my Rolodex of past exploits, and was like, oh yeah, we could do this and this, and I had a whole bunch of lived experiences to draw from to then come up with a plan to begin to address how we were gonna, you know, continue feeding our community, and in having to also cope with, if only we had the resources for all these years, what kind of system would we have in place to be ready for these kinds of inevitabilities, right? So we're kind of still in this, but really have learned quite a great deal over this last 2.5 years around that resilience component, the importance of emergency, but also looking at how to decentralize and reinforcing the importance of a food system that is multi-sector. And I think that's important, and something that UGC I think does really well, and we're very much trying to hold up the importance of somebody who grows food at this scale, like a tiny scale, and somebody who's really trying to grow commercially with a fully capitalized project, and how they're both so important. You can't really, if you're really doing equitable systems, you have to value them similarly. They're gonna develop at different rates, but they're both valuable. We want to see them flourish at the same time. So yeah, this is an image too I wanted to share, and some more information you all can absorb, of our first Urban Growers Collective apprentice program. So lots of trial and error over the many years, and one of the things we realize is that everybody, once people catch this farming bug, they want to be farmers, like right away. And it takes such a long time to really become a grower, to become a farmer, to understand the economics, to understand that for oneself, to adjust one's lifestyle, to farm. It's not, it's very difficult to farm without exploiting people or the environment to be able to actually generate a lot of capital. I don't even think it's possible. But it is possible to grow and build a thriving ecosystem and food system that is equitably managed, that is equitably owned, and that can really serve as a source of public health and enterprise for our neighborhoods. But if we try to scale it up and use the same extractive economics, it does not work. So need a different kind of market economic system. Why not? But I'm not an anti-capitalist, so I don't utilize that language. I really talk about how can we figure out how to generate capital without exploiting people or the environment. That is the problem to solve. How do you do that? How do you do that in a way that's sustainable? And how do you do that in a way that is attainable by folks who are have been historically the most oppressed by the food system, which is primarily people of color and women. So to do this, we work in these 3 quadrants. They're not monoliths, but they're kind of 3 core areas: food access, community engagement, job training, and education. And they're swirly and kind of interconnect. I've kind of already started talking about this. Why food? It could be housing. It could be, for me, it started off as visual art. It could be transportation. You could pick pretty much anything. But food, to me, covers all those things. You can talk about anything with food and really address multiple systems simultaneously, and really engage everybody, because we all eat. We like to eat 2 to 3 times a day. Some folks more than 2 to 3 times a day. We like to eat. And so that is an equalizer amongst everybody globally. So if we can start having conversations around food and addressing some of these issues, which seem to me at this point in our human history should not be issues anymore. In a country as wealthy as we are, we'd rather send people up into space just to have a little joyride and have people starving, which makes no sense. So there's some ethics here. There's sort of a responsibility that I think the food system has because of these issues. The trade-offs, the episodic and cyclical nature of how people need food, and how that impacts the quality of life, and the inability to recover from PTSD. It is traumatic to not be able to feed your children. It is traumatic to consistently have to be marginalized because of race, and to live in a city that has as much resources as we do and still have redlining very much alive and kicking. So these issues are not just sort of hunger issues. They're really kind of a measure of how structural racism has manifested and continues to manifest by race and class in our city and really globally. So why food is really key, because if we're able to address those issues with something as fundamental as what we eat every day, who we buy our food from, do we buy our food, who pays for that food, who's financing that food, are we subsidizing human food, which we don't do in this country. We subsidize food for products that make us all sick. That's what gets subsidized, not the spinach and the collards and the tomatoes and the okra and the grapes and all the delicious foods, the whole grains, all the things that we need to be eating, the responsibly raised animals, responsibly fed animals, and not having those hormones re-enter our systems. These are just basic things that we do not do in this country. So, this is another why food. It's a powerful, powerful lens to address all kinds of issues. And I don't have the facts, but it's always resonated with me that second next to the Department of Defense's budget, it's the USDA's budget, and we don't have any subsidies to encourage people to grow food for humans. We have subsidies for wheat, soybean, corn, so on. So I think that's just something for us to all think about and why that is, and who that benefits and who does not benefit from that. So the things that we grow, that we all are encouraged to eat, are called specialty crops. And they're not covered by some of those subsidies, and barely by crop insurance. So there's some pretty dramatic disparities there that continue to reinforce and create sort of a false sense of what agriculture is in this country, not what it could be in this country. So that's a little bit of about why and how urban agriculture at the neighborhood level, at the small scale level, is so important, because it really reconnects people with all of those dynamic questions. Well, if I can make money doing this, and then I can sell and I can make sure people have healthy food, what are the other things I could do? So those are all things that intrigued me 20 years ago and continue to do so. And to me, it's about making sure that we scale up and that we ask these questions. We ask these basic questions, not from our current frame of reality. Because if you were in your reality, if you live where you have 5 or 6 grocery stores, you got a farmer's market, there's people down the way that don't have as much as you do, but you don't really, until you really examine it, don't realize that there's food apartheid. People really, literally do not have the same reality that you have just a few blocks away. It's not the same. And we can go through life without really, really examining that. And I think the food system and being able to really look at these questions allows us to sort of take off those illusions of what food apartheid really is. So we use urban agriculture as a tool and a method to really address these things. Multi-generational is important because there's so much knowledge and information that is already being lost. Because a lot of young people, 20 years ago, I decided to come back to farming. I'm rare. I'm in my early 50s. So just knowing that there's just sort of lag, and folks who have this knowledge of the land and how to grow food, how to care for the earth, how to work with natural cycles, those folks are departing. And so it's really important to create spaces where some of that knowledge can be transferred, that it can be archived. There's people who are doing that work, collecting oral history, collecting pictures, making sure that there is a repository of information that allows us to begin to re-embrace some of those things, not for exploitation, but for preservation, and to understand how to work more in balance with our local ecology, to create true sustainability, not sort of the veneer of sustainability. So one of the things that I always have to, I'm talking about racism, I have to talk about structural violence and incarceration. And just some of the numbers. We would rather pay the money to incarcerate somebody, which is very expensive, rather than doing rehabilitation. And the impacts of that are devastating within Black and brown communities, and something that we know that the more that we are able to create built environments that are reflective and productive, that we short circuit some of those systems. And it's not just about putting in a pretty garden. That's nice. It's really about how do I create those pathways, right? The pathways to freedom where someone can feel and know that they have the ability to have sovereignty within their own community, to be able to own an empty lot, to be able to build a home, to be able to really begin having those kind of baseline wealth building tactics and strategies that everybody else has. And when those dynamics begin to manifest, of course crime goes down. Of course folks shift some of the despair and hopelessness, which a lot of the structural violence is reflecting. You know, so I think it's really important when we're looking at these things to, I think from a design perspective, just being where I am, thinking about how we not just talk about the issues, but how do we build in that ability to generate wealth that is not billions of dollars of wealth, but just intergenerational wealth. I have a place that my children can, have when I pass and not be displaced because we put in a pretty garden and suddenly folks move in who can afford to pay the taxes and build what they want, displace us again. So it's always an interesting tension when we begin to do these projects. So I've been really, really cognizant of it, both as as an art student, just knowing that we would move into, in the 80s, we'd move into the places and it would be, within a few years, it was like, we couldn't afford to live there anymore. And this has happened over and over again with creatives and folks coming in and just creating space to have community and to try to create new realities. How do we stop that cycle? This is a problem I'm hoping will be solved collectively. How do we both stabilize communities and not displace people and create sustainable economies that don't exploit or extract? That's what I've been working on. So these are some of the job training programs that we've activated, and you can go to the website and read all about this. I just want to kind of give a flavor for the immensity of the approaches to both create the pathways, but also because it does require a multi-sector, multifaceted approach to really have a comprehensive shift. And a lot of it is, it's some trailblazing, but it's also just really practical. Having a mobile market that can go from, community to community without a brick and mortar, because having a brick and mortar is really expensive. And because a lot of the partners we work with may not be in the same place the next year. Or the community that we're working with may be moving. It might be gentrified out of an area, and people need access to healthy, fresh produce that we're growing and that we're acquiring from equitable wholesalers and folks who are also in the business of becoming commercial growers or want to contribute to their community's food shed. So those health disparities and the ability to harness SNAP, the double value program, which then allows us to pay our farmers and ourselves as farmers, really what it costs us to grow the food without it impacting the ability for somebody in the community to access. And then with the pandemic, we just added a baseline $10 voucher for anybody who comes to the bus to be able to go on the bus and shop for $10, which is a lot of food because our prices are fair. So all of those can really contribute to having, and we're just a tiny little program, but it's a model, right, that should be replicated across Chicago, wherever there is a place, a region, and a need to be able to kind of almost franchise this kind of operation. So that's kind of where we're working, but we were able to do quite a bit. And this was in partnership. We had a squad, Chicago Food Policy Action Council convened us and created space. I'm also a co-founder and part of that board, so, Roger Cooley's here and a few other team members. But it was really this kind of having community and having space held to be able to kind of generate these ideas to be able to meet those needs. We were able to fund quite a few, thousands of meals, prepared meals, because a lot of folks don't have access to, cooking, stoves and refrigeration to be able to get a nutritious meal, especially during COVID, with a lot of our communities being needing additional immune boosting meals and all the time, but it became very not knowing what was going to happen, wanting to make sure as many people as we could possibly feed and also utilize the donations and resources that were coming through our organizations to create a future worker co-op that could be in business to continue building wealth and not just, kind of do emergency food without really thinking about the sustainability. And so Shy Fresh Kitchen, who I highly recommend that you all check out, is a worker-owned co-op that does prepared meals, and They, along with Centro Trabalhadores Unidas in South Chicago, were able to also distribute lots of prepared meals to the undocumented community and folks within that community. So really important work, but just pivoting resources in a way that could build sustainability and support those new models rather than, you know, a kitchen that maybe doesn't really care about the quality of food that's going into our community. But investing in those entities that are, you know, operated by women who are coming out of incarceration, folks who are looking to really give back to the community, and through those investments, short circuit lots of cycles of poverty and structural violence. So, oh, here, let me go back. And then we do like monthly CSAs, so you can, you know, get a beautiful subscription for your household, and know that that subscription, with whatever wealth that you have, is directly supporting somebody who can't afford it. So we really like that dichotomy of being able to work with folks who don't have a lot and work with folks who have a lot, and to be able to connect those pieces. I think it's really important. So this is just a long list of different community engagement components. One of the things I want to kind of highlight, and I'll talk a little bit about through some of the work we've done on public land, which was an important strategy. It was also a problem-solving thing because I couldn't figure out how to get access to land in Chicago and wanted to start growing food right away. And I was like, oh, parks. They're the commons. They're all of our land. Why can't I grow food here? And that's the coolest thing about Chicago, one of the coolest things, besides all the water and awesome people, is that if you have a really good idea and no one can argue with you, you gotta do some things. And it really was, you know, it's like it's food sovereignty. Why can't we should be growing food on our public land for everybody? So all of the projects that Growing Power Chicago and then Urban Growers Collective, that we were able to really get some traction, was because of the public. So our work has been consistently supported by the citizens of Chicago. So this project is in South Chicago. That's you can see all the former steel and some of the Gary there. This is not like near 90th and Lakeshore Drive. So that's US 41 that you're seeing curving. This is from 2 years ago, so there's a lot more development here. You can't really see here. There's a community garden. So this is 7 acres. The entire plot is 17 acres. As of today, we have 63 community garden plots in this space. We had 2. So over the last few years, and this is kind of how the projects develop. You know, it takes a while to build an infrastructure, but then the more activity that's in the space, the more infrastructure, the youth programs that we run, and we always start with youth programs, the accessibility increases and it continues, there's ownership, and before you know it, you know, we got 60, 70 families farming, gardening, and looking at the space in a very different way. And because of that, CTU, who also operates and works in this area, wants to start 5 gardens and wants our support to be able to be a conduit to support those gardens. So that kind of proliferation, because there is a hub that's public, but also there's gates. We grow all of our food in this quadrant. This is a geodesic dome. We're slowly learning how to build the infrastructure. We don't have a lot of resources, and most people don't. And so if I'm working at the community level, I can't come in with millions of dollars of resources and plop something down. It's like a spaceship from nowhere. And I can't even access, is that even for me? Can I access that? But if we're growing at the speed of community, then there's more accessibility, there's understanding, and then as we elevate, everybody elevates. The key, of course, is the gentrification factor. This material is all made from us. So compost, that's energy. It's, you know, a natural resource component of energy. This is how we heat our hoop houses. And this is an image I took about 6 weeks ago. Freezing cold outside, and we have kale growing all winter without any heat. So this is low tech for us. This is just biomass, composting, generating heat, and then just having double plastic, no extra, you know, air blowing through, and we found years ago that didn't really make that much of a difference. We started off using old plastic, so you don't even need this Agribon, which is fancy. You can just use any kind of plastic. So we did that for many years, really demonstrating the kind of ability to harness and create natural fertility systems. So these living biological worm systems is a terminology and sort of the experimentation that my father innovated, but really kind of talking about taking these building blocks of life and really harnessing them and magnifying them and concentrating them so food can grow more intensively in a small space using natural systems. Because globally, most people don't have access to oil, petroleum-based fertility. It's very expensive and it disrupts the environment and financing. So we want people to be able to control their own operations, and that's good for the environment as well. I mentioned the medicinal component. I was expecting to have maybe 10 people in this program. We had a very short window. We had 120 applicants, all wanting to learn about the healing attributes of plants for their own personal healing, family, and community and collective care. So we established a program to begin doing that. So we're in our first year, and it's pretty amazing to have a group of folks learning and growing together. This is the kind of healing end of things. Art on the Farm, I was with this dance troupe doing this cultural immersion, but really integrating movement. A lot of us embody and kind of hold trauma in our physical forms. So to be able to work in community and nourishing and be able to release some of that historic trauma, especially when our bodies were used for labor, and then you're on the farm and you're doing these repetitive motion, you start to release that energy. So it's really, really powerful. So to be able to work with a dance company that has that consciousness and is very much does pieces in the Dunham and different diaspora traditions is powerful. So these are some stills from a piece they did a few years ago, and then another piece that they're going to be debuting next summer at our Art on the Farm project, which is this is an image of it. I've been farming this space in North President's Court in Grant Park since 2005. Very few people know that a black woman designs this space, and it's right there across from Buckingham Fountain. This is one of my classic images of this space. It's a potager, so it's a formal garden, but we're growing food, herbs, edible flowers, and it's a place where young people from the South and the West Side can come and grow food and sort of see agriculture within a different space. It's also the Commons. It's a formal space, and we're farming in it in Chicago's front yard. So just as a policy setting attribute, it was really important to do that and to sort of set the bar very high around the aesthetics of what urban agriculture could be and how and why it's so important to integrate these plants, this food within this built environment. And it can be very formal, and it also is powerful to have young people come down there and picking collard greens in Chicago, in North President's Court. So this is, kind of a very, very deeply rooted in liberation, but also kind of reclamation of the city and sort of how we operate. This is another shot. You can sort of see, I like my Sankofa images, just sort of what the actual, what do I have, like 2 minutes? I know. I'm getting to it. I'm moving as quick as I can. Just some of these images, but you can really see how these projects, kind of embody both the beauty, the ability to transform spaces. I wanted to share a little bit about the Community Food Navigator that Westland's also working on, and many other folks that really came out of the food policy, Chicago Food Policy Action Council's work around just creating resources and making them transparent to everybody. And now we've really been on this journey for the last 3 years to really develop and utilize tech to be able to better connect. Also, Chris Rudd was instrumental, Shy by Design, to really make sure that the kind of anti-racism kind of root of making sure that how we build it was going to continue to support and dismantle structural oppression. So a lot of circular pieces. We're working with UIC on just, again, making what assets are in the university. Where are they? How can that connect with the work that's happening at the community level? So these are some of the things that are happening now that Urban Growers Collective, or you'll hear me say UGC, is going to be moving forward to create those pathways for young people and community. And so a lot of these formulas are pretty, they're not anything particularly new, but they're important because of who is leading them and how we're leading them and what that means for disruptive, both technology, but disruptive social systems. And disruptive in a, not in a like chaotic way, but disruptive in like, you know, this looks different than who typically is doing these kinds of projects. But you can see this timeline. It has taken many, many years, you know, working on really 22 years, because it started in 2001. But officially 2002 to what we're projecting to open these buildings that I'm going to share. We're deeply partnered with the Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation. That's going to build the first healthy hub, which is the first full-service health center in this community in 40 years. The first COVID death in Chicago was in Auburn Gresham. So just to give an idea of just how redlining has manifested in public health and economic underdevelopment. We also won the Chicago Prize, which is allowing us to close the holes to build these facilities. Again, Adinkra, you know, this idea of resilience and humility and coming back to center. And that's the other Sankofa, the bird like looking behind itself. You know, building a regional economic hub is our goal for always growing Auburn Gresham. That's a little anagram, or Auburn Gresham always growing, however you want to look at it. To be able to connect the urban agriculture community with compost and green energy, with health, and for students to be able to come here, visitors to come here because of a new metro station that's being built. This is the construct. The digester is built. We're going to be starting to accept waste in June of this year, and then we're going to be activating the Community Education Center, which will embody the job creation component, fresh produce, small business incubation, educational program, and really around closing the loop between organic waste, being able to grow, have material to grow more food, and have green, clean energy. So the kind of epitome of sustainability. So the more good food we eat, the more waste we have, the more energy we have. So it's a perpetual energy machine, and it's conflict-free energy. And so to be able to decentralize energy, to have enough material to repair depleted and contaminated soil at an economic level that is impactful enough. It's a $32 million investment just for the digester and another 14 for the way we want to do the Community Education Center. After years of working on the margins and just creating spaces and being very creative, and to be able to then kind of skyrocket ahead, and at the same time to be able to go east to our rural urban farm where folks can get their hands in the dirt and see that value and connection between both. Like we have this high-tech space that we're doing all these things, and it's complex problem solving, and we're also creating jobs and creating real tangible ability for people to enter into this space. But people have to see it, they had to see it at a scale, consistently, and it needs to be accessible and visible, which is where the Community Food Navigator and all of the innovators that are kind of, I would say, third generation now, doing this work and really elevating the different ways that we're looking at how food can be a transformative tool within cities. Really, cities, and I'm very agnostic about scale as far as rural, urban. They're kind of the same to me. It's just different materials, different kind of spatial paradigms, and requiring different kinds of approaches, but equally valuable. And I like to really kind of dismantle that sort of that separation between rural and urban, because we need both. We can't grow all of our food in Chicago, in our cities. We can grow a lot, but we can't grow everything because most people want to eat a whole bunch of other stuff. So you need some other spaces. So I just always try to remind everybody about that. This is, at some point, I want it to be a dynamic, like, movable apparatus, but it's really this sort of cat's cradle of interconnection that is very different than a linear kind of construct, but really around how these pieces kind of interact and how the work that we're doing, hyper-local, has a global kind of impact. This sort of shows from the top left, kind of this L shape, to the bottom right, the evolution of the site. Some of the, we were kind of constrained with our budget and just with planning the plan development, what we could do, what we could put where. And then because of the site was a former brownfield, it was it was indigenous land, International Harvester, City of Chicago impound lot, and then us. So it was heavily contaminated. International Harvester never cleaned the site up. Then it got transferred through some bankruptcy shenanigans to the city. Then it was an impound lot, and then we got it for $1. And it cost us probably $3 million to clean the site up. We were able to get EPA funds, but it's still, we've just discovered a lot of other extra things there. So it's a whole interesting tale just in building this site. Phase 2, which we started last January through April, work with Simeon Career Academy students who came out, saw the site, saw the designs, understood immediately what anaerobic digestion was, and were like mad that we hadn't already built it. Like, where you been? I'm like, I know, I'm trying to get here. And it was really gratifying to have our team, who started off as high school youth corps, to be able to lead those charrettes. I actually didn't participate other than activating it. The team was able to do that. So this is what they came up with. They wanted a space that was, you could drive in, it was accessible, that had office, and they looked at this sort of 100-year storm retention area and were like, that's a whole bunch of wasted space. They wanted this boardwalk with meeting space. They wanted culinary spaces to learn how to cook food, to be food entrepreneurs, to bring families in. They wanted a fresh market that they could chill in, but also come in and get groceries and and have their products on the shelves. And so that's what we built. And so it's really a pretty interesting, pretty small space that we had left after the configuration with the digester. The idea that this campus will support all of these activities, being able to do R&D within the green space that has the boardwalk, and just climate resilient plants and uptake. There's lots of interest in that. Being able to do the retail component, and to really just show how you can transform spaces. We're in a unique location. We're next to a park, Mahalia Jackson Park, which of course resonates intensely for me because she was a mother of the civil rights movement as well as an amazing gospel singer. And we're literally like a stone's throw from Simeon Career Academy. So the site this is what it was when we first started, and you can see the transformation in this space. This is right before they sealed the tank. I took this image from one end of the tank while we were inside of it, actually, with Ogo Batista and Southeast Task Force after they had just won the battle against General Iron. And so it was really a powerful visit to get her seal of approval and to know that we can move into spaces like this and talk about what we should have in our communities, as opposed to having to constantly fight against contaminating entities coming in. We also went to COP26, and we won this Climate Challenge Cup, which was a big deal. And I was able to send a emerging leader within our organization to Glasgow to represent, and we won. All for this, to grow more kale, to have material. This is where, how do I do more of this in ways that our communities can eat, in a way that is dignified, that's consistent, that we're controlling those resources so that we're able to build wealth in ways that exemplify best practices and do not exploit people or the environment. That is the mantra. How do you generate capital without exploiting people or the environment and solve complex social issues? And that's it. So I always run over.
Work. Is it on? Yeah, there we go. Thank you so much, Erika. I really appreciate all of your wonderful insights and sharing with us this journey that you've been on for the last 20 years. So one of the things that we've talked about, and I'd love for you to share some more. So you mentioned, this partnership that you have with UIC. How do you see universities like ours leveraging the resources that we have, the talented student pool. And I think, there's a tension with us, wanting to have the latest, greatest technology, but how can we support initiatives like yours?
I mean, I think that's a complex question in that the challenge of universities is that they're episodic, right? Students come and go. So I think that it is first and foremost, I think, kind of a policy, a policy approach around integrating community participatory responsibility and development across all schools. So some of the work, whether it's professors or students or community entities like that I'm part of, asking for that parity, it doesn't necessarily manifest in policy. So I think there has to be a unilateral policy around investment in and equitable relationships whenever community is involved. So projects like mine, I'm always looking for long-term, sustained partners that are going to solve the issues that I need solving, as opposed to coming in with a research or an idea that was being projected onto my work. So I think that having equitable relationships with community innovators is key for both the kind of just for innovation. I think that's how we actually solve complex problems and not create more extractive scenarios. But it also creates more, it amplifies genius. I don't know how else to say it. I just watch it happening all the time, and everybody gets excited because we're working with folks who aren't typically at the table, and I think that has to be, there's steps that have to be in place to make sure that there's not extraction and exploitation, and it has to be something that there's a long-term commitment. It's not just George Floyd effect, that it's really a serious commitment for reparational repair pathways, and that we acknowledge that there isn't, to achieve equity, it's not just invite Erika to a talk, it's about how do we get involved with the Erikas of the world, who are, and I come from I didn't grow up with a lot of money, but my parents, I grew up with some privilege. So in the context of that, of how I look at the world, my exposure, I didn't grow up with a lot of money, we struggled, but the wealth of possibility was there, and the wealth of possibility can be introduced to the young people through these projects, which is why we wanted it, the Auburn Gresham. We could have built it, it had already been built if we would have put it out on Doty Road, somewhere far away. But to actually invest in a community strategically to build wealth, and to be able to wrap around other kinds of pathways for young people to go here, to go to UIC, to go to U of C, to go to Northeastern, wherever, that needs to be something that everybody at a high level understands, can articulate consistently, and then it manifests in policy. I'll be talking. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's certainly the way that I approach my work, right? Like understanding who's there, what they're doing, and what's the best way to plug in. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Justin Walker, who is a 2021 alumni of the Institute of Design. And Justin works with a powerhouse Chicago design firm called Chai by Design. And so Justin, I would love for you to share with us kind of what you guys do, and how your preparation at ID, kind of how your work at ID helped lead you there, and how that fits into the things that Erika is talking about, like doing the systems transformation, empowering people through your work.
Oh, all right. So Justin Walker. So I work with Chai by Design as a design research and strategist. So we practice anti-racist design through a process of co-design, community-led design. So designing with communities and the folks who are most impacted by whatever issue we're designing around. and community-led. So all the work that we do is driven by folks in the communities, not by us. And so we kind of act as facilitators of the genius that Erika just mentioned. And so we work in social systems, food systems, child welfare, education, other social systems to design anti-racist interventions for those systems. I guess in talking about kind of how we work, I mean, I'll talk about the Food Navigator project that Erika mentioned before. So we facilitated a number of co-design sessions with Black and brown growers, food producers, other stakeholders in the systems, folks focusing on policy, folks from the city, human services. But what we did was to help the Navigator team to determine what a collective vision of the future of the Chicago food system should be, and determine what the strategies and principles are that the organization or the platform should use and able to get there. But we did that through a process of co-design. And so, like I said before, the thoughts and the ideas that came forward weren't from the Shop by Design team, but were from the folks who we were working with in the sessions. And so we did a number of things through these sessions. So one, thinking about kind of what the challenges are for Black and brown growers, food producers, what the challenges are that are, kind of disparately impacting them, and then connecting that to policy processes that exist that create and enable those outcomes. We worked with folks to understand kind of who all the stakeholders are that are in the system and impacted by the system, and to understand what the value exchanges are that are currently happening. Right, so there's a lot of work that's already being done in the system. There's a lot of value that's being exchanged, but working to try to understand what those things are so we can include those things in whatever interventions are created to kind of address the system. And the work is not just about the understanding of the current system, but also thinking about what the system should look like. So these growers and food producers, other stakeholders. Also, we work with a group of youth from UGC to understand what they think the future of the food system should be, and taking the things that were brought up in those sessions to help the Food Navigator to think about, what the things are that they should be doing as they grow the platform and grow the organization. And then I think the third question was, what are the things that I learned here at ID that were helpful? I'll say one thing that's been extremely helpful for me at ID, that I learned at ID, was thinking in systems. We see a lot of the outcomes in the world, but there aren't a lot of designers that I've kind of met that think deeply in systems and doing the work that Erika does and working in social systems. You can't just look at the outcomes, right? You have to think about kind of what are the things that are creating the outcomes, what are the mental models that are creating the outcomes, what are the interactions that are happening within systems and across systems that are creating the outcomes that we're seeing, and then also, what the interactions should be to create the outcomes that we want, create the outcomes that are more just, create outcomes that are anti-racist. And then, I think I see some ID students here. I would encourage each student here to work on facilitation. I think you know, the work that we do at Shy by Design is all about bringing people together, bringing people in the room who aren't always in the room, and facilitating conversations, activities to help people to bring out the knowledge that they have, that they've always had, right? And so to do that, you have to be able to facilitate. So that was a very important piece for me as well. And then co-design, learning to decenter ourselves as designers in the work. So it's not about us. We don't have the answers. The folks in communities, the folks who the issues are impacting are the folks who are going to solve the problems and have the knowledge to be able to solve the problems. And so learning the co-design process, I think was key for me to start to understand that, but then to understand kind of what type of work and what type of designer I wanted to be. And so for me, design is about creating the new, but it's about creating the new with folks who are, impacted by racist systems, other systems of oppression. And so how do I do work as a designer, but also bring folks into the process to help to guide and to drive change, the change that they are thinking about, and the change that they kind of want to see in the world. So I think those three things for me are the kind of the biggest things I learned here.
So I know we're running up on time. I'd like to say that Justin took my systems class.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah.
So I feel like we're running up on time, and I'd love, we are going to head over to a reception where you can grab the folks here one-on-one. But Justin, I just want to pick up on one of the things that you said, and both you and Erika talk a lot about a vision of the future that is anti-racist, that is sustainable, right? Like, we're coming off of Earth Day last Friday. You guys are working on the front lines of climate justice, right? And with communities that are on the front lines. So what are things that, and I feel this is a long question, but I'm going to ask you to, maybe give like one or two things, short things. What are some of the things that we can do as individuals to help move towards those changes? So in our individual actions to support your work and changes in the food system.
You're asking long questions and then saying I can't give a long answer. I mean, I think that, like, for me, and I think Justin already shared this, is like understanding the science of racism is really important. It is a construct, it is structure, and it's the ultimate form of gaslighting. So just understanding it, I think, is huge. Looking at it from a design perspective, like, okay, how am I going to oppress these people over here and take advantage of all these resources? And do it on a global scale. I mean, it's a fascinating, if you remove all of your emotions from it, it's fascinating because it's design. And I think that's essential. And I think just breaking down like oppression and understanding of what structural racism, what internalized oppression looks like in people of color and how we continue to participate in it. And then how to having that in like, as a kind of a construct to work from, it's just about anything. Doing things in an anti-racist way, disrupting those systems in small ways, coming and contributing labor. Like, one of the most amazing things that I witnessed during the pandemic was the amount of white people, or just say however people identify, who came out and contributed some serious labor. And like in a way that I knew was therapeutic. And I'll mention his name again because I think George Floyd really defined that. It was so different, and like a real kind of understanding for the first time on an epic level. It didn't last very long. Not to say that people aren't continuing to contribute, because they are, but I think that that moment, that epiphany of, oh, this is how it is for y'all, was huge. And I think having the ability to see that, to see like what the world could look like if everybody just gave up a little of their privilege, just shifted, and understood that it's not the same for everybody. To get to equity is there's a lot of leveling up that has to happen. And it shouldn't be, a small handful of people like us doing the work, because we've sacrificed a great deal to sort of create a new reality. And are now at this point where we can enter into larger scale economic frameworks, but it's gonna be challenging. People need to know about it, and we are not working with the same level of resources as like, an Exelon. Like we're not, nor would I necessarily want to, right? So I think it's education, I think it's contributing labor, purchasing food from people who are in the community, and really encouraging people to do that, contributing, putting your food waste, not throwing it in the trash anymore. Simple things. Everyone says that, Earth Day, everyone, let me go plant something and pick up some trash, but I think it really is becoming engaged at the block level in your own reality, and then understanding that your reality may be different and taking an opportunity, like Tanika Lewis's work, like be able to do a folded map, like what does your address look like on the opposite side of the city? It's not the same, but go and travel, We can do that within our own city. People have never been to the South Side. People are still afraid to come to the South Side, which is crazy to me. It's not the safest anymore, but it's not safe anywhere, And so there's human beings living on the South and West Side, and we live in our communities, come to our community, simple stuff like that. But I could go on and on.
Man, so everything that Erika said, but I was gonna speak to things from a design perspective. I think as designers, we know and we should see that racism exists in every system. So no matter what you are designing, racism exists. I think we as designers need to do the work to be able to identify racist outcomes, racist interactions, and then the things that we do design, that we address those things as well. And so I know that not everyone is going to practice anti-racist design in the way that I do, but I do know that each of us can do the work to start learning to identify these things and to address them. And we learn a lot of methods and frameworks through design, but many of those methods and frameworks are not gonna help us to address racism. And so there needs to be a period coming here soon where we're starting to develop new methods, new processes, new strategies for addressing oppression. I know that a lot of us as designers don't think in that way, but I think for designers to kind of be, and I said before, like designers aren't going to solve any societal problems, right? But in order for us to be facilitators of folks in communities and folks across the world, really to do that, we have to start doing that work.
Thanks so much, Justin and Erika. I will now turn it over back to Anijo to close us off. So join me in thanking Erika and Justin.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being part of this conversation. Can we have a round of applause for Erika Allen, Justin Walker, and of course, Wesson Ashton. Thank you all. Thanks for doing this. So again, like Raj mentioned, we are deeply grateful to the family of Lucas Daniel, Marty Daniel, and April Starr, and all the friends and family that enabled this endowment and enables us to do this every year. So this is the kind of conversation that we like to have at ID. And you heard Justin say this, and I want to point it out again. We like to think in systems, right? And we have PhD students who are creating dissertations with frameworks around asymmetries in systems. We have master's students who are applying that knowledge out in the world, like Justin. And we have the creative alternative to the MDM, which is our program for executives who want to come in and learn about design without actually maybe changing a career. So if you're interested in this, please be part of our community. We have a program coming up May 18th, and that's something that you may want to be part of. Before we end, I want to thank a few people. Kristen Gaken, our Assistant Dean of Content and Influence, without whom we could have not done this event. Please give a round of applause to Kristen. All of our staff, faculty, and students, all of the people who came in at the last moment to stamp these wonderful cards that are on your seats. For those of you who don't know that or didn't notice, these are plantable paper. So the green one, I think it's lettuce, and the red ones are wildflower. So if you want to take this home and plant this, please go ahead and do it. It's for you to take home, share with other people. And then the recording that we did today is going to be available on both YouTube and Vimeo. Thanks again to our wonderful video team for doing this for us. And you can watch the video of the lecture and the conversation and all of us talking about this on Vimeo and YouTube. And finally, thanks to all of you for turning up. I know it's a cold evening. We all thought spring was here. Chicago didn't get the memo, but thank you all for turning up. We have some locally sourced, sustainable appetizers and hors d'oeuvres for you to enjoy. Please engage with Erika, Justin, and Veslin, and everybody else. Thank you again. Thanks for coming.